much for joining us. In this episode, we're going to talk about pious puns, the theology of life experience, networking among churches, and celebrate handcrafted round 2. Hello.
Hi, Danielle.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine. How are you?
I'm good.
Really?
Just returned from Chicago.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so that was fun.
Nice.
I haven't been to Chicago in a while, so it's like my favorite city.
Oh, I know.
I really
I think
love
I could live
Chicago.
there.
Yeah.
If I had to pick one.
Yep.
For
Except
GLN,
the
right?
traffic.
Oh, the traffic.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. Traveling to the city.
They have not figured that out.
No.
And they never will.
25 miles from our hotel into the city. I think that morning it took us an hour and 40.
No, I'm absolutely not doing that.
Hour and 30, something like that. Yeah, it was bad.
What's your go-to in traffic? Do you just you're usually driving.
Yeah, I'm usually driving. So, I just
So you're
go
just paying
to
attention. I'm trying to think.
pumping the brakes and not pumping the brakes.
Are you like a wait so you can move a lot, or do you just stay on the tail of the
I
person
stay
in
on the
front of you?
tail.
Yeah, I do too. I hate when people try to.
Oh, yeah. The person in front of me in a Tesla had like a 3-car length in front of them. I'm like, what is wrong with you? Get up there.
This is what
because
people-
then people come in.
Right.
And
they get in the.
They get in front of them.
I know. It drives me nuts.
It's bad.
The thing I ask myself with traffic and people standing in lines, all you have to do to know if you should do something is think, what if everyone did this?
Right.
If everyone left 3 car lengths,
Yes, exactly.
you'd be in Minneapolis.
Right.
Waiting to get to Chicago.
Exactly.
Little rant.
It's a question of the common good.
It is a question of the common good.
Right.
We don't have much traffic around here in Erie, so.
No, it made me very thankful to be living in Erie.
Oh yeah,
That traffic
We've had a
situation.
couple people in from out of town to interview for some things, and both of them have been like, "Well, when are you gonna pick me up?" I'm
Right.
like 10 minutes before we have to be there. Wait, what? Well, what about it's like 8 in the morning? I'm like, yeah, 5 minutes before we need to be there. That does not matter. It's just funny.
Move to Erie, everybody.
Yeah,
Move to Erie's great.
Good traffic, low cost of living.
Right.
Talk to us. Yeah. Just let's do this. Okay. So mega church memories. So we just want to reflect on, we've been in ministry together for a very long time and focus on kind of what we've gone through, what should or shouldn't have been, and what we've learned. So you thought we should talk today about merch mania.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
This was like an explode onto the scene. We've got to brand this sucker. And
not even.
we
have to. Well, I was going to say a bad word.
So I'm
like
thinking,
bastardized brands
right,
is what we were doing.
Pretty much, yeah. So instead of Gold's Gym, everybody had the God's Gym T-shirts. And, instead of Sprite, the Sprite logo, they would put Spirit. Or Coca-Cola, Jesus, he's the real thing.
He's the reason,
And I even thought about like WWJD. Remember that whole
thing? Oh,
yeah,
and FROG, faithful to rely on God. That was part 2 of that. That was like the cool, the new version of that.
So WWJD, all of a sudden there's these bracelets everywhere, and T-shirts, and just, the merch explosion.
That was crazy.
Yeah.
I remember when it went, I remember the specific piece of merch that was the tipping point for me where I was like, I'm done with this.
Oh.
There was a jingle that Ford had. Have you driven a Ford lately? Okay.
Yeah.
The shirt for that one was, have you considered the Lord lately? And I was like, this is not even.
See.
And Lord was like the Ford, But it's not even right. Like, it was like, no, this is not.
Danielle,
that
was so good. What's wrong with you?
That's not it. Anyway, I specifically remember that one.
I'm a pun guy, too.
I know you are.
It did not.
It was a dark night of the soul for me.
Yeah, it did not catch for me. We had, what made me think about this is this last Christmas, my daughter-in-law got my Aiden's boyfriend, who she knows who loves Jesus. She thought it would be good to give him a Christmas present of like a T-shirt, and it said, it was an Easter T-shirt that said, "He is risen," RIZZIN. With Riz. So it's like, this is still happening.
It's still, now it's more ironic.
Right.
That's the thing, though. Then it wasn't ironic.
No.
It was like, well, I'm taking a stand.
Right. This is my
and I'm
witness.
Wearing my...
This is my testimony.
It was.
Yeah.
It was like, whoa.
Absolutely.
That person just walked in with a Coca-Cola, Jesus, whatever it was. They must be
Danielle,
serious
get it
about their
right.
faith.
He's Jesus. He's the real
he's
thing.
the reason. He's the real thing.
Yeah, he's the real thing.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
Now now I feel like it's ironic.
So, but listen, are there any lasting benefits to this?
No.
Okay,
And this
let's
is the
move
one
on. This is the one where there's
This is
none.
one where it's not. I actually don't know. I mean, I guess the one thing is, and this is a stretch. I do think it could have potentially been one of the roots of us developing kind of like creative marketing around Christianity. Now, I'm telling you this is a stretch because I think it is. But it's the only thing I can come up with. Just the idea that you can...
So then we have to debate, is creative marketing
I
around
know.
Christianity a good thing?
Correct. Well, that'll be the next episode. But just
I know
I
what
don't
you
know
mean.
though. Like it I'm not for, like we talked about in another episode, like I'm just not for like, hey, don't watch The Office, watch the Christian Office.
Right.
Like I'm not about that. That like don't use YouTube, use
subculture.
GodTube. I'm not for it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Lost another 8 pastors, as I like to say. But that's a personal conviction. I think if you're going to enter in and just keep your guard up or whatever. But
The interesting thing is, so that whole like how do Christians intersect with culture? This is a way bigger conversation than we can have right now. But
we've got 50 minutes at least. We could do it. Yeah.
But like I'm just doing some study for an upcoming series, looking back at how the conservative liberal divide happened in our country. In Christianity, really a response to what was going on in Germany and Europe and Schleiermacher and some of the
Schleiermacher.
some of the
Derek.
textual criticism and all this kind of stuff. There was like this big response in the United States of some people that are like on board with that. It had to do with obviously the reliability of Scripture, and then there was this huge counter movement to like, no, we're going into our own subculture. And radio was made, so we're going to overtake the radio waves with Christianity, and we're gonna build our own colleges, and we're going to build our, like there was this whole retreat from culture, and then which I think has landed to see the liberal side kind of grab a hold of all of the secular ideas, and to see the conservative side go into a hole. Has led to where we are right now, where we cannot see eye to eye.
Yeah.
And really, I heard somebody say recently, those two things are the two wings of the same bird.
Oh, good one.
And so,
That's
but
cool.
but the whole idea then, this is a long and winding road back to our T-shirts.
Have you considered the Lord lately?
Is I think the answer to that is you don't dive headfirst into culture like the one side did, and you don't retreat totally from culture like the other side did and create your own little subculture. You redeem culture. You have a redemptive voice in culture.
Yeah,
you
that's good.
Celebrate the things that are good and we have common ground on. You speak prophetically into the things that don't, but there's this redemptive presence.
Yeah, that's good.
And so here's the stretch. I don't know whether the T-shirts
probably not.
are an attempt at the redemptive presence or if they're more reflective of we're creating our own subculture.
Probably the latter.
that.
Yeah.
So there's no redemptive value in these.
No.
Sorry.
What you're talking about, though, makes me think of, and there's a lot of opinions on this, but like a Mosaic church in LA.
Yeah.
Like art, pushing stuff.
yeah.
Like
Fashion.
they're like in the,
Yeah.
they're in there doing that, redemptive work, which is, I mean, it's possible. It's just,
Sure.
it's an intentional work, I think.
Yeah.
So sorry, maybe that one didn't have much redemption.
It was fun.
Okay.
It was fun to remember.
It's fun to think about. Yeah. Oh my goodness. We're starting to get suggestions for this segment, by the way. So
Oh, neat.
yeah, it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
All right. So training notes. This is a chapter we dedicate to overflow from internal staff trainings and some staff Q&A. And recently for our office staff, we had a development day. We do those kind of quarterly. Right? Quarterly?
Yeah. Yep.
And you did a training on the...
Wait, describe the development day
Yeah,
for a second
so-
for people. I think they might find that helpful.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. So we have a day every quarter where people within our staff will develop a training on either something they're passionate about or something like we feel like we need to cover. We have some topics that we want to go through culturally with our staff. So I think like 3 to 4 staff people do that. And then there's like we do a main session together for about an hour.
Yeah, it's like 11 to noon.
11 to 2.
Yeah, 11 to 2 total.
Yeah, yeah.
First
quick
session, quick lunch,
yeah,
and then breakouts.
You can choose 2 breakouts out of the 4
Yeah.
that we have. And it's really cool.
Yeah.
I think people like this last one a lot.
Yeah. And it gives some of our other staff kind of a teaching platform.
Yeah,
or
it's a training
like
ground.
Training ground
Yeah.
To lead a session and yeah.
And I think it's cool to see like you can see a different side of the people that are leading, and like it's cool.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see how it goes from here.
Yeah.
So your recent opening session with everybody before lunch was on the theology of life experience. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit. Yeah, give some.
Yeah.
On that.
So this is actually a little bit of a spin-off from the handcrafted class, which we'll talk about in a minute, where we're helping people find their calling. But I think a part of everyone's calling, what God's put them in the world to do, is to understand their life story, like some of the stuff that they've been through. So again, having a high view of God, a high view of his sovereignty, this idea that you've gone through the stuff that you've gone through, not haphazardly or by happenstance, but you've gone through it for a reason, and that God can use those things. And so, one of the little taglines I use is that, I think it's probably from Dave Rhodes, as most things are these days. While everyone has experienced their life story, few have interpreted it.
Yeah.
And so if you want to grow in your impact in ministry as a person and your calling or whatever, you have to interpret the things you've experienced and then say, how might God use these things to help other people? So, and the other thing on a very practical level is that when you begin to interpret some of those life experiences that God's brought you through, it can help you to step out of some of the destructive cycles,
right?
That have dominated your life or maybe your family, like even family tree kind of thing. Because a lot of us just kind of fall into those patterns. We fall into the patterns our parents had and our grandparents had and everybody had before that. And we just continue the cycle. And I think unless you kind of stop, what has God brought me through, interpret, analyze, that's one of the ways that we can say, you know what, I'm going to stop the cycle of alcoholism.
Yeah. That's good.
And I'm not gonna pass this one on to my kids. And so, but it takes a moment to stop and to identify and so anyway, that's kind of the foundation behind this idea that our life experience is able to be analyzed, and we can do it through the lens of like what is God up to. Yeah,
and I think the 2 things that rubs up against for us too is 2 of our dream disciple roles, the compassionate storyteller role and the savvy follower role. The other thing that it does over time, I think, is it stops this like kind of, some of us can get into this like victim mentality, or you're like surprised that you're in a situation like, how am I finding myself here? As if God was like, oh my gosh, what's going on with Danielle? How'd that happen?
Right.
You can look back on those things and
That's
see
right.
like, oh, okay, he's prepared me for whatever this is.
Yeah.
And so it, along with like the breaking the cycles thing, I think it sets you up for quicker learning like about yourself and being able to help other people through, similar things. But,
yeah. So it also, I think, when we do some of that work, it also allows us to trace back, why do I value what I value?
Yeah.
Why am I passionate about what I'm passionate about? Well, I look back and go, oh, I value this because my dad, when I saw him when I was 6, in this moment, do this thing. Yeah. And it started me on a trajectory of going, you know what? I'm gonna value that too, because I saw, my dad or my mom or whatever the experience was, instill this in me. And it wasn't even necessarily what they said, it was what I saw them do, or so I think just being able to trace back and go, what were some of those moments, and that was kind of the exercise I walked our staff through, is go, what were some of the high points, what were some of the hard times that really affected you? And we did it super fast, but
I could see spending hours on that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's what we do in the class, but just trying to do snapshots of like, what were 5 high points, what were 5 hard times, and then we trying to distill those down into what were some hinge moments, when you look at that, what were some of the real turning points, drawing from those lists, and then at those turning points going, okay, what was it that emerged out of those times? Was there a hero that was in that story at that time? Was there a lesson? Was there a pain point? Was there something I'm never doing that again? Like what, put words to like what actually came out of that hinge moment. So anyway, we worked through that. I think it was really instructive to some people. I saw some of the feedback, and people I think were thankful for it. And I think the fun thing was, we did some broke into pairs and kind of shared with each other. And there was some learning. People were like, oh my gosh, I never knew this about this person. And like just some cool stuff that happened on our staff that way. So
yeah, it's really, it was good. It was really good. And it gave another angle at telling your story.
Yes.
For our people, which is
absolutely
good. That's what I'm always all about.
Yeah.
In these, I think you were going to put these in the show notes, right? Just kind of your notes from this class.
Yeah, I'll put the notes in there, and kind of the 5. I walked through just 5 quick points of like the theology of life experience. So God can use past heartache to instill lifelong values. God can use frightening life events to advance his cause. God can teach us lessons when we're young that will serve us through old age. God can use our experiences to help others in the same boat, and God can use our life experiences to tell his gospel story. So those were kind of the 5 points that we built around, but really the exercise of the thing was having people kind of walk through that life map and those hinge points, and then share that with each other, and then kind of a what do you walk away? Who needs to hear this?
Right. Yeah.
And we are storytellers, and I think people are moved and impacted by story, and so when we can get a handle on our own story and what God has brought us through, it really helps us to do that better.
Yeah, great. So as we tweak our assimilation model to have more of a disciple-making focus and invent a multiplication funnel to awake the lake and reach our region, we're learning as we go. Each week, we want to have a topic to discuss in front of you and with you, and practical moments of learning that we're kind of slogging through on the way. And today's topic is about cooperation instead of competition among churches, networking, if you will, quote unquote. So why did you want to talk about this? What do you want to talk about, like partnerships, networking?
Yeah. So, a big part of this, the Awake the Lake vision, I think one of the things we realized early on is like, when we're talking about 9 counties between Cleveland and Buffalo, I mean, ultimately that's the space where we feel God has called us to influence and reach and impact. And it was, not too long after that idea settled in that we realized we can't do that alone.
Yeah, there's no way.
That's gonna take like a bigger hands in the middle effort. And so, when we're talking partnerships, and we're, again, you just in your introduction said we're in the middle of all this, so we definitely don't have it figured out. But we're talking not only church partnerships, but what does it look like to partner with businesses? What does it look like to partner with nonprofits and movement leaders, people who maybe have a heart for that same geography along the Lake Erie shores, kind of thing. And so, I think this idea of partnership is we don't want to be a denomination. We don't want to be like a necessarily formal network or something like that. But what does it look like to partner together with like-minded churches, organizations, other individuals, nonprofits that want to see this region reached with the gospel, want to see discipleship happening throughout that space, to see people finding their callings throughout that space. And so anyway, kind of when you start boiling that down to where do we start, or what do we start thinking about, it does come down to like, can churches figure out how to work together or not? Because in the end, Jesus, John 17, prayer and vision was just like, the world's not going to know who I am until the church is together. And, the church has had a rich history of not being together. And so
Correct.
It continues. Yeah. So Stephen, we wanted you to come in and kind of speak to this. You've got some new endeavors going on as well, but also just because of your experience in a smaller church and a bigger church, and thinking about partnerships. You've been in different regions. You were up in kind of the Buffalo, upstate New York area for a little while. And just thinking about, what does this look like? We were in a meeting recently with a church in our region going, hey man, what could a merger look like? Or how could we work together? Not even a merger, just like, how could we help each other in this moment? And so we've been having some conversations around like, what could partnership look like? We've done some thinking about it. So anyway, just wanted you to come in and talk about that. And I'd like to start kind of with the negative, and we'll build positive. Okay. And talk about just like
Let's
why.
try it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see how it goes. Why is this hard? I think why in the church space is it hard when we start talking about partnerships.
Yeah. I think, we were in a meeting, it's maybe a month and a half ago now, where I think we all, as we were sitting in the meeting, we all realized that most pastors, if they're a lead pastor, are entrepreneurial in nature. And I honestly think that's one of the first hurdles for the church.
Sure.
It's, however your leadership structure works in that church, the truth is that person's sort of steering the ship, controlling the tide, if you will. And I think what we've found, even with this Awake the Lake stuff, is that people are interested, but they also want to contextualize too. And I think a large part of that is the entrepreneurial nature mindset of a lead pastor, that there's almost like this desire to create just because God has made them, those types of people. So it's almost like it's hard for us to understand or reconcile partnership sometimes when we go, I don't just want to take what they're giving me, if that's what partnership is, because I feel like God's made something in me to actually, be entrepreneurial with.
Right. Create something of my own.
Yeah.
And to actually cooperate together, you have to let go of little pieces of something to do that in a healthy way. And so that's a good
So
point.
that entrepreneurial pastor who is actually leading the, if you will, the effort of partnership also has to go, okay, my hands are open. It's almost like how we've looked at partnership at times needs to be a little bit redefined here.
Yeah, I'd like to get more into that. Because I do think that's a key component. Because typically what partnership has looked like in the past has been, who's ever got the idea runs it.
Who runs it,
and everybody else gets on board.
Yeah, that's why we all stay quiet in committee meetings back in the day, right? Yeah. Oh,
that's funny.
Sally spoke up.
She's got it.
It's her thing.
Yep. That's funny.
Yeah, and so and then it's like what you're saying is it's the getting on board part that's hard for people who have their own ideas and their churches. They're trying to create an identity for their own church, and they're part of it, and there's some sin that creeps in there too, probably, in all of us. That's like, it's not my thing, so I'm not really gonna go fully in on it.
Let me speak to that just from a small church pastor mindset, because I felt this. It's almost like if you allow yourself to get there, it's almost a rite of passage for small church pastors. That if you feel like you're moving and shaking a little bit and you're invited to the table, typically by a larger church, there's that ego. So if you feel like your idea is not necessarily welcomed or celebrated, so it's like, well, screw you. Or if it's hey, that's actually really good, then your ego is stroked. So it's not true biblical partnership in that sense. So there's this like, I have to check my ego before I come to the table of the conversation of partnership. Because I would feel that, because it's, we're prone to want to succeed in our areas. And so there is a, corporate Christian ladder that does exist, that sometimes small pastors can go, oh yes, this is my chance, to really put my right foot forward. And if it doesn't go well, then, again, I don't want to be part of it. And that's all ego driven. Or if they do like it, then great, But again, it's ego driven. It's not true biblical partnership.
Yeah.
So I remember feeling that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know for me too, and obviously we're a little bit bigger than what you were coming from New York. But, I think about back when, we got invited to the table at LCBC down, so this is a much bigger church than us. So we're the small church in this scenario coming to the table. Yep. And I remember thinking for the first couple hours in the room of like, okay, what's the catch? Like when is the ask? When does the shoe drop? When does here's what we're asking you to get on board with, what we're asking you to sacrifice so that you can be part of our thing, and so there is this like weird territorialism and ego. We're calling it the right word. I mean, it is ego in the end. And like you said, that's not true. That's not true partnership.
Is it fair to say, and maybe just some dialogue around this, it's ego, which is not good, but it's ego built on good intentions, right? So,
well, yeah, you have a group of people that you feel that you're shepherding, you're entrusted to,
Right.
you're leading. Yeah.
So you want to see the best for that area,
Right.
you want to see the best for that region, but sometimes we allow sin to creep in, and then our ego
Yeah.
takes over.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's important to say, because we're not necessarily demonizing anybody here,
Right.
because we realize the heart that you have for your congregations are pure, they're honorable.
Right.
But sometimes if we don't check our ego at the door, then that's where partnership begins to dissolve and break down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think coming from so like if we think about that big church, small church dynamic that can sometimes happen in these partnerships, and again, that's not what it always comes down to, but I do think it's a dynamic
Yeah, it's pretty good.
that we don't talk about very often out loud. And so I think it's important to, I think on kind of the big church side of it, because we've been part of some of those gatherings where it's like maybe we're the big church in the room kind of thing, and inviting other churches to participate in something. I think one of the things that can creep into that is just going, in at least in our church, that like there are systems and structures that we have that are almost like in the water that we hardly even know exist, that when other people interact with that, it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
You need my something by when? It's like, well, we work a month ahead. And it's like, well, we don't work a month ahead.
I'm right. I started on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm like, why are we even talking about this? It's not for 3 months. So we're like,
Exactly.
Right.
So part of our planning process is like, this is
That's
where
really-
it fits.
yeah.
And if we're not careful, so the sinister side of that can be like, we think our processes are God's gift to the world or something,
Right.
and everybody should, but there's an innocent side of that, of just like, it's so much in the atmosphere of how we operate that we don't even
yeah, you didn't realize.
you don't even realize kind of other people aren't doing that same thing kind
Yeah.
of deal. And so, I think kind of from a big church perspective, that can sometimes be the overlooked part of it, is that people can just get put off by, you're doing what when,
Yeah.
and we have to do what by when, and that's not how we operate.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what's also important in that to recognize is that a small church doesn't necessarily need that. A Grace Church does need that,
Right.
because of the
You mean that level of-
the level of complexity,
Yeah.
the level of systems and
Organizing.
structures. Yeah, because and that's where partnership can become challenging and difficult too. Because and we've even with some of the worship nights that we've done, we've had those partnerships.
I want to talk about that more in a minute.
And we're sort of we're steering it,
Right.
and people. There's almost an education that has to happen. Like whoever's steering it, they're going to bring their systems and structures to the table or not.
Right.
If it's a small church, it's hard to. I don't want to say bend the knee. It's probably the wrong term, but it's hard to like get on board because we're going to bring our systems and structures are not to the table, the processes that we're used to. And that alone is a learning curve that sometimes in people's minds, if we're just honest, it's not worth it. Because it's it's already hard enough to like move the communion table in a small church.
Right.
Now we have to like re-educate our whole people around this is when somebody needs this. Like, no, forget that.
Right.
I'm never going to win that battle. I'm not even winning the battles in my own church.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, it's worth it, considering.
And it's interesting because like I feel like on sometimes when it has worked, again, just being kind of naive on some of these things in the early days, some of the times when it's worked is when there is a church maybe who thinks in the moment that their greatest need is a little bit more systems. And then all of a sudden when they kind of brush up against a moment like that, they're like, oh my gosh, can we adopt some of those same systems that you guys are doing? And so in that way, it could be really synergistic. When it's not a problem, it's actually when that church goes, that's actually our growth edge, is to implement some of these, or like to get ahead of things a little bit better. And so, I think, you talked about kind of coming in with a certain mentality. Like, I think coming in with a mentality on all sides of any kind of partnership of like, what can we learn from how this other group does this, is a very, 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 very important posture.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And even in addition to that, what it exposes is the different philosophies of ministry too. And that comes with each different type of church, each entrepreneurial pastor as well. But if we're not coming to the table with a posture of learning, we're going to come to the table with our philosophy of ministry, and partnership's never going to happen.
Yeah.
We're not even going to get to the table, if you will, because we've already got in mind, this is the way that we do it. This is our philosophy. And that goes for small churches too, because there's a lot of pride in small churches. Like, no, absolutely, I'm not going to adopt that, because that bucks up against our philosophy of ministry. So coming in with this level of humility, understanding it's different, and I'm going to learn, I think is very important. Yeah.
So there's philosophy, there's systems and structures. I want to also talk a little bit about theology, because theology, I think, can be a barrier to partnership. And I know for us, like, even as we're thinking about expanding that definition of partnership, like, what would it look like for a church to partner with a business where, first of all, theology isn't even,
it's not on the table.
It's really not even at play. Right. I mean, a little bit, but between churches, that can become a big deal. So have you had any thoughts about that or any experience with that?
and I would say this is where the small church, at least in my experience, the small church can be both good and bad at the same time. And this is where pride can creep in. I think it would be fair to say, if anybody's listening and you want to challenge, please do so. But the average small church will almost at times pharisaically look at large churches as churches that have forsaken theology.
Or watering it down.
For the sake of, and I think that comes, at least small churches would look at that. It comes from the mega church, seeker-sensitive movement. Like, you've made your circle so broad that you actually stand for nothing. And I think we can see evidences of that too, which isn't helpful for small churches. But in self-reflection and self-awareness, I think our downfall is that we could be so theologically focused that our bar is actually so high that we actually become our own stumbling block in partnership. And so theology is definitely important. But that's why conversation at a partnership table needs to happen early. If we're going, hey, we're talking about partnership here. We're going, okay, what are the close-handed things and what are the open-handed things? So that when we go back to our own congregations, we go back to our own people, we can say, we've actually had those conversations. And I think a lot of times what our people just want to know is, what are we standing on and what are we not standing on? They don't want the wishy-washiness. So if we can even say, we've agreed that this is our closed-handed, this is how we're going to partner, and these are our open-handed. They may be some open-handed things that you would consider closed-handed, as a congregant, but we've agreed from a partnership standpoint that this is what's closed and this is what's open. That's very important. But I would say, there's definitely some pride and lack of self-awareness from the small church perspective, for sure.
So let's talk about some stories where we've kind of brushed up against this. I know for us, we've gone from, obviously wanting to kind of participate in community events with other churches over the years, to actually exploring, we haven't done this yet, but actually exploring mergers. And actually we did. I mean, when our Grace Harbor Creek situation, it was probably less of a merger, a little bit more of a takeover, but in that regard, because that church was kind of ready to hand the baton.
It was on the table.
And so they kind of handed the baton to us, and we kind of came in and began to to implement our own strategy of doing church. But I think thinking about times when we've had lots of conversations over the last few years with other churches who maybe said, we're not sure what our next step is. Are we ready to hire a new pastor? Would we like to kind of fold in and be more of a Grace site or that kind of stuff? And again, we've not pulled the trigger on any of that yet. Although I think going forward, in order for the church to reach, we'll just take our region, for example, we have to have a new level of cooperation. I don't think it's possible without that. And so whether there's formal or informal or whatever, and so part of, I think, what we need to do is kind of learn from experience, learn from our past, learn from when we've tried to do this before. So we'll start with you, Stephen. Like, do you have any stories of times where, there's been the hint of partnership or the possibility of partnership, and what have you, maybe from the story standpoint, what have you learned from that?
I mean, when I first became the lead pastor at the church that I was pastoring at, it was an American Baptist church at the time. And American Baptists over the years have kind of moved into sort of social progressive direction. And so the churches in our sphere, our region that we sought to partner with, wanted nothing to do with us, just simply because of the affiliation.
Wow. Yeah.
Didn't matter if
part of the wrong denomination.
You fly with the crows, you get shot with them, type deal.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, even to the point where we were invited to the table. What we did as a small church was put on really good events. Nicole's a wonderful event planner. I have sort of that, event planning creativity in my DNA as well, if you will. So we love to do that. And they would see that. They'd see the marketing ability that we had. So we were even brought to the table and asked if we wanted to get in on this. But then when I saw the list of partnering churches and our name wasn't on it, I'm like, what's going on? They're like, well, we can't partner with you publicly because of this affiliation.
Whoa.
And so just really complex, real weird, convoluted kind of stuff.
How'd that make you feel?
We didn't partner with them. But it goes to show the complexity of partnership. It's almost like a Nicodemus type situation.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be a Christian in secret.
In the dark.
This is Jesus. Not that I'm Jesus. Bad illustration, but
Whoa, that fell apart quick.
that's
All right.
Man.
illustration
We're
effort.
spiraling.
Yeah, we all have holes in our illustration. That one was a bad one, but anyway.
Oh my God.
But it makes it really, really difficult, and that actually created some wounds. We actually ended up partnering with those churches. We were out of the American Baptist by that point.
So they were,
but we did end up having those conversations down the road where we were able to say, hey, as a church, we were actually really hurt by this. Like, you knew we were preaching the gospel. You knew that even theologically, we were very aligned.
Yeah.
And we just had this, affiliation that you weren't happy with.
Yeah.
Which I don't, again, think is right. But it was fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing I said we would come back to, so, we did a event with an African-American church, a small African-American church in town. And so not only do we have the denominational stuff, but then you've got the racial differences and
Lots of
whole
different
kind of
cultures,
philosophical, cultural differences. And so trying to do that was an interesting experiment. Let me just start by saying the finished product was unbelievable. Like, that was one of those, you've heard me say it, like, that was one of those sitting down front with my friend who we've been working on these kinds of relationships in our city for so many years. It felt like a harvest of like lots of seed planting for about a decade, and finally saw some sprouts of, as our people were interacting with each other and worshiping together, and they kind of got up out of their seats and mixed together and sat with different people so that they were, it was just a beautiful thing. But the planning was different, and it kind of goes back to some of that stuff that we were saying before. That's like, there's different systems, there's different timetables, there's different ways we handle guest musicians and, all that kind of stuff is like a different cultural thing. And
even like authority.
The authority,
like,
who calls what.
There were meetings that I was like, you would never be in ever.
Right.
But we needed you to be in them because
what does the pastor think?
Yeah. What does the pastor, yeah. Just stuff like that. Yeah.
So, I think that one of the things that I walked away, maybe you can say a lesson or two from that, but like one of the things I walked away from was one of those where we very intentionally early on said, we'll do what we're good at, but we want to give up kind of authoritative control to them and to just plan the thing and like let us know where we can intersect and help. And we hosted it too, because we had the venue to host it. But I think along the way, just that kind of like open-handed handing over, like it's your call, not our call, many times kind of throughout that process, even when it squeezed some of our ways that we were used to doing things, I think in the end is kind of what made it successful.
For sure.
But it took intentionality to not just take it over.
For sure.
Apply our own
that's very
systems, and I think that was one of the things I walked away from, was just like, yeah, there are times when it may be helpful for everybody for us to run it, but there are times when it's very helpful for us to not run it. Very, very intentionally not run it.
And I would say, because I was representing tech at the time,
Right.
and it was incredibly challenging and helpful for the tech teams to see how worship was done differently.
Yes.
And so where our tech teams may have a lack of patience in disorganized execution, or what we would perceive as, because we've got click tracks, we've got spontaneous worship,
timers,
what do you mean I can't just click next on the slides, where we actually had to have some flexibility. It gave us the opportunity to actually practice grace and patience.
Wow, that's good.
In that, so it was a great perspective change for us.
That's good.
Yeah. Do you have any memories that you want to
Just
contribute?
well, I remember thinking in one of the meetings that they were, because sometimes this ego thing again. If you're the either more organized or larger of the organizations, you can think like, oh, we're gonna like really get this across the finish line for them, kind of a thing. And I remember one of the pastors was talking, and I was like, whoa, they are just as open-handed as we are with what they think should happen and how things should happen. And I remember them saying, like, this is your house, like, so this, that. They were deferring just as much as we were. It was just in different ways, which was really cool. And I think for us, and this might just be like a leadership thing that might be helpful, our team was having discussions about, okay, this is going to go at a different pace than we're used to. It's going to be tighter timelines. It's going to be all these kinds of things. So what can we do with everything that we actually can control in our own ministry to continue to get space so that we can help in the ways that we needed to meet them at a different place, not lower, just different planning speed and different. I mean, we went through so many iterations of different things, and we were just kind of spinning. But like, I think in the end, the fact that we could control what we could control without affecting their speed, pace, whatever, I think is another thing that really helped, because it let them do what they needed to do. They wouldn't have been able to do it at our in our framework or whatever. That's
good. That's good. So let's talk about some principles, and then I want to just maybe do an overarching, like, why is it worth it to fight through all the awkwardness?
Yikes. Two egos like you two. I don't know what. So this has been revealing.
Yeah, we've poured it all out. Yeah, exactly. We've poured it all out. So let's talk about some principles. I'll throw it to you, Stephen. Let's talk about just some principles from some of the stuff that we've covered. Yeah. How would we boil it down for people to talk about? That's like, good. Here's partnership 101. Like, let's talk about cooperating versus competing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the list in some sense could be endless.
Right.
I'll put forth 4 if you want to add to any or fill them out. I think right out of the gate, and we've already kind of shared this, but we're identifying what is shared in this. So what are we chasing after together, and what are we not chasing after together? I think is a really helpful conversation that helps us eliminate the, well, why are they doing that down the road conversation, or maybe offense that they would take, or, hey, I thought we were partnered on this, but now you're doing this. And so I think if we can, and again, you can't predict the future, but at least if you're coming to the table with that type of approach and willingness to have that conversation, like, well, okay, even if it feels very anemic right now in terms of partnership, what are we chasing after together, and what are we not chasing after together? And it's almost like, this is probably another bad illustration, probably not as bad as the last one, but
nothing's going to touch that one.
Giddy up, right? Here we go. But it's almost like when you're hiring for an employee, when you're hiring for a position, they want to know, what am I doing and what am I not doing? Yeah. Right. So I think from a partnership standpoint, we need to go, what are we doing together? What are we not doing?
That's
together?
good.
It's a healthy conversation.
I think obviously, I mean, trust is paramount. So we're building trust, understanding, and accountability. And we just know that when we meet in those spaces, whether we've agreed to a monthly meeting, that what we need to work on, and this may be tools, this may be workshops, at least early on, or perhaps even ongoing, is that we're going to operate in such a way where I now trust Derek Sanford, right? Because, I mean, you can just dismantle the house right away if I can't trust that your motives are pure.
Right.
And so we need to get to a place in partnership where I'm looking at the pastor across the table and I'm going, I may not do things the way that he does it, but I trust him.
Right,
I trust that his motives are for the advancement of the gospel and for the good of the bride of Christ. Like, that's never going to be in question because we've done the prep work. And when we do that, when trust is there, we can have a level of understanding and we can have that accountability. I think we need to define our regional roles and responsibilities. And this, we've done a lot of, are beginning to do a lot of talk about church DNA, that every church is uniquely designed and different. And I think that's actually very intentional of our sovereign God.
That's right. That's a beautiful thing.
But let's get it on paper. Let's define our regional roles and responsibilities. What is Grace Church good at? What is, Erie First good at? What is Grace Church actually not good at? What is Erie First not good at? I'm just using them as an example. But, and from that, once we get that on paper, we can go, okay, these are maybe where we're going to lead the charge, and this is where you guys are going to lead the charge. And so we're just easily defining some regional roles and responsibilities. And then I think the last one for me, if I were to pick four, is don't do it unless you're ready to commit to the long road.
That's
just
good.
Don't even entertain it. It's honestly not worth it. It's almost better getting your cards on the table rather than going, let's try it. And then let's jump, because our job is to shepherd a body of believers. And so if we're saying yes, it's almost like let your yes be yes and your no be no type deal.
Right.
If we're saying yes and we're saying yes, we're gonna, and this is what I appreciate about you, Derek, honestly, is, I mean, you're 20, 25 years invested in reconciling the white church and the black church. And we've been able to see glimpses of that. Because you said, I'm going to commit to the long road. It's going to be messy. It's going to be ugly. It's not going to be pretty, but it's going to be worth it. And so I think in any type of partnership conversation, we're going, are we willing to commit to the long road? And if the answer is yes, then great, let's go for it.
That's great. Yeah, and I think about like just individual ways that can play out between churches and going, man, I'm thinking about the example of some of our mutual friends, like, Dan and Justin up there, who like literally the one church has said, we're going to give you our pastor one day a week.
Yeah, wow, yeah.
And he's going to come.
Who would we call our lead pastor too?
Right. Yeah, their lead
wild.
pastor. We're giving you our lead pastor one day a week because he's good at some things your pastor isn't good at.
Yeah, that's wild.
And your pastor
That's
wants
amazing.
him to come in and help lead the team in a way that he can't and so, I know some churches that are talking about how could we like share preaching, like could we prepare our sermons together so that, kind of like what we do here, where one person's kind of carrying the freight of it and we all don't have to spend the time on all the research, but then like share. And what if a whole region was having a similar series together, a message, a group of messages together,
cool.
where now we're all thinking about the same thing at the same time, like that, or what, if one church is great at, community outreach and has that kind of figured out, what if all the other churches on board go, we're not going to create our own community outreach, but think about the power of working together through that. So anyway, I just think about all of that potential and go, when I go, why is it worth fighting through the awkward? I'm thinking, man, the church could be so much stronger if we didn't have these silly little silos. And what if we could share staff? What if somebody had like a great tech department and was just like, hey, I'm great at raising up tech volunteers. Send me your volunteers. Right. And I'll train them and send them back. Anyway, that's why, when I think about what it could be
potential.
I just think, man, the church could just be so much more effective if we didn't have these little tiny silos all trying to do our own.
It's almost this complementary strengths,
right? Exactly.
Portion of it as well.
Yeah. Talk about that a little bit. Like, imagine those DNA, those individual church DNAs working together.
Yeah.
What that could mean for the body.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've touched on it because I think the reality as well. When I go back to my role as a lead pastor. I mean, we had so many limited resources. I mean, I think I said in one of the podcasts before, like our whole budget was $120,000 a year.
Yeah.
And that's, so we're spending nothing, we don't.
And there are people listening going, you had
how
$120,000
nice.
a year.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was good for the church our size. I mean,
Right.
we're a church of 100 people,
That's great.
Right.
And so there were some real faithful givers, but that's a drop in the bucket for a larger church as well. So there is this reality of limited resources, but I fully believe that our body at Wilson First Baptist Church, I mean, we had so many strengths. There is an understanding of resiliency and community involvement that I think they could teach the average megachurch about. That I haven't seen, honestly, replicated anywhere else outside of Wilson.
That's cool.
And this is a small community since 2008 that experienced like some mind-boggling, unique tragedies. And to see how they, as a community, rallied together. And again, 1,500 people, right? So our church is, 10% of that, if you will, of that community at the size that we were. So we're living proof of that DNA, if you will. We're adopting it as well. And man, I've been away from there for 5 years now, and to this day, I still haven't found a type of resiliency and community love and engagement that existed in that spot.
Incredible. Yeah,
That's cool.
Yeah, and I think for pastors listening, and we Shane, our friend, told this story about it. Actually, a church in Buffalo, the Buffalo area, that I would like to still need to reach out to him. But he talked about this transition from going. He had to stop thinking I am the pastor of a church to thinking I am a pastor of the church.
Yeah.
And the church is this bigger entity spread across, the region, ultimately the world. But, I'm just one of the pastors of the bigger church. And how do I contribute to that? And then the question that they asked was, what does God want to do? And how do we help God get what he wants?
Yeah, that's good.
And that's really the only question we need to be asking. What is God trying to do? And then how do we make sure God gets what he wants?
Yeah.
And if you dream about it from like a vision standpoint, I mean, you've talked, through this Awake the Lake series about the 7 sectors of society.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to list them off the top of my head, but the point that you made for Grace Church as an influential body in this region, which Grace Church is, the church is the only place where all the other 6 sectors of society actually meet.
Yeah, they convene every week
on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So think about that from a regional standpoint. That if we could actually figure out partnership, and all these other bodies are also convening those 6 sectors of society too. I mean the opportunity to change culture, to change, societal shifts. I mean, that's where we start talking about movements, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Is that actually truly becomes possible. So
That's right.
Partnership is worth, it's not just worth the conversation, it's almost vital to the conversation.
Yeah, it's good. Thanks so much, Stephen.
Yeah, man.
Thanks. Okay, so that was good with Stephen.
Yeah, good with Stephen.
I was thinking toward the end of that, I was going to say it, but then I didn't. And you need to tell me right now. Here we go.
Wow.
Tell me if I'm off.
Okay.
When you guys were talking, I was just thinking like, it's almost like if you're a lead pastor or you're high, kind of high level leadership in your church, you have to get yourself to the point where you will genuinely celebrate one of the partners who is succeeding in your view, maybe faster than you, better than you, whatever. And almost like the idea of maybe one of the principles is like building in times for, public celebration together.
Yeah.
Like because that's it, right? Like, I don't know. That's part of it. Like you can't if you're the leader, you can't always be, if you're always the best,
right.
It's the same as hiring or anything like that. Like if you're always the best one, that's as high as it's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I, whether it's it or not, but it gives you a glimpse of your heart.
Yeah.
In a very specific way.
Yeah, yeah.
Of going, can I be happy, or am I A, jealous, or The other option I see all the time is just I'm going to cast shade.
Sure.
Like, if I don't know the full story, I see that they did that. In the back of my mind, I'm going, oh, I bet there's more to that story.
Yeah.
Or I bet they took a shortcut, or I bet they cheated, or I bet they like watered down their theology.
Right.
Or I bet that, like there's always this thing that can creep in if somebody does something good. It's horrible. It's wicked. It's disgusting.
It's human. Yeah. It's like the base human nature. It's so bad.
But I think you're right. I think that's a great indicator of going is my heart ready for partnership?
Right.
Well, can I celebrate somebody who did something and do it publicly and even get my own head around they did it better than me?
Right. That's just wild. Anyway, yeah.
I like that. Yeah, that's good.
All right. So another thing we want to go over is something that happened this week, and you finished the second pilot. Well, I don't even think we need to call it a pilot anymore.
Yeah.
You finished the second round of Handcrafted.
Yeah.
Which, as a reminder, is a class that you worked on with Dave Clarity House, right?
Yeah, and David Lovelace.
David Lovelace, yeah, thank you. And the idea is to help people identify their God-given calling, and that's kind of like the thing that I'm just distilling this down in my own language. But basically, like, no matter what situation you're in, this is who you are. This is what you're bringing to the table, which is really powerful.
Yeah, and the big deliverable of the class is we try to distill that down into 2 words. So to try to get down to 2 words. And so a lot of the class is just working through, like, some of this stuff that we talked about earlier with, life mapping and passions and personality and, like, all this stuff. How's God made you?
Yeah.
But then the other component is then where has God placed you? So who are the people around you that He's called you to influence? What is your primary place where you're going to live out that calling? But the main deliverable is these 2 words, and it was really fun this time. I made some adjustments in how we got there from the first class that I think made it a lot better.
Oh, good.
And but the fun part is the last class. Everybody in the class, there's this kind of 1-page declaration statement where they, say their name and this is my calling and this is how I got there and here's my church's mission statement. Here's how I see those 2 things intersecting and here's my primary area of where I'm going to live this out and here's my next step that I'm going to take. And now we've built a kind of a coaching component around this too, so those folks can now go into a conversation with a coach that says, okay, let's process through this a little bit more and help you do it. But man, that last class was very emotional. Lots of tears this time, and just it's endlessly fascinating to me to see how God has made people different and put different passions in their life, and so from one person who got up there from, an adoption story that's just like, my thing is, I don't remember the 2, restoring harmony or something like that, but just the ability, like, in all areas of my life to kind of take people in who are struggling and who are on the outskirts and like every room I want to walk in, I want to look for the underdog and I want to look for the, and so like this just like heart exploding thing to this like engineer that gets up there and goes, I think her 2 words were structuring success. Oh. And it's like,
that's awesome.
God built me to make plans.
Cool.
And I make really good plans.
That's awesome.
And the rooms that I go into, like, I can help structure people to like live to their fullest.
That's cool.
And it's just like, it's just so fascinating to see the different ways. And, but in both of those cases, of course, the engineer didn't cry and the other person did cry.
That's funny.
So even just watching the wiring of these people, but going, so cool. This process of doing this and putting words to this was equally valuable for those 2 kinds of people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So totally. It's like, we're not so different that this wasn't kind of a universal good,
That's
cool.
cool.
that came from just like naming it and putting words to it. So yeah, it was really, really rewarding.
Good.
The job now, the challenge now, I think, is getting enough trainers trained so that we can take this around. This is something that we would love to see happen regionally. I don't think it's, we talked about competing and cooperating today. To me, this is one of those cooperation things.
Yeah, for sure.
Where it's like, there is no competition in this at all. Other than going, man, if you want people in your church to understand how God has called them, this will be, it's different than a spiritual gifts test. It's not like how will they serve the body necessarily, some, but it's more, what has He called them to in every arena of their lives? And I just think it's going to help people live Christianly outside
Totally.
the walls of the church and inside the walls of the church. And, there's just like benefit.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Anyway.
Did
it's been
anybody,
great.
2 words happen to be training, calling?
Some.
You.
Listen, we did have this class, though. Several people come forward and say, I want to be a trainer. Of this.
Oh,
Like,
nice.
I'm
Cool.
so passionate about this.
Okay, that's cool.
That get me in the next training thing because I want to
Nice.
do it. So, yeah.
Sweet.
So it is building, what do they call it? Loyal, what's the brand thing?
Loyalists?
Loyal followers,
Yeah,
loyal
yeah.
clients or whatever.
Yeah, that's cool.
The people who come through it are just like, everyone should do this.
That's
like,
awesome.
'cause it's
That's a
super
great
helpful.
feeling.
Yeah.
I work really closely to 2 people that were in this session.
Yeah.
And one I know the words, one I don't, but I can tell they're acting differently.
Interesting.
Which is really cool.
Yep.
Like I can just like words that they're saying, I'm like,
Yep.
what?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's really cool.
It does something to you when you know it.
Yeah, it's like a confidence.
When you put words to it.
Yeah.
Because I think we all know it. Like at some level, you know it.
You have I have a sense of it.
But,
Yeah.
But to name it and go, that's why I'm on the planet.
Oh, that's crazy.
Like,
that's awesome.
That God made me to do that in every space I find myself in. It's really powerful.
Love it.
Yep.
Okay, thanks for joining us today. If you like the episode, you can tell us by leaving a rating or review, and you don't want to miss what's next, so make sure you subscribe. You can also help a friend by sharing this with them, so thanks. You can find detailed show notes or related resources over at dereksanford.com/reinventing church. That's where you can also subscribe to his weekly newsletter and get all the latest free tools and posts and all the things. So we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.